you so much for joining us today. We've been having a little bit of internet connectivity problems, so we're going to just cross our fingers and hope that everything works okay. But bear with us just in case it doesn't. So it's my great pleasure to welcome to the seminar series George Bob-Milliar, who's joining us now, I think, from Ghana, where he's a senior lecturer at the Department of History and Political Studies at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. He'll also be joining us here at Oxford, we hope, next year as an AFOX fellow, COVID vaccine permitting, I very much hope. And today he'll be talking to us about presidential campaign stops in Ghana. And because we're having some internet problems, George is just going to keep his camera off for now. And we'll try to show his PowerPoint and hope it works. And there should be plenty of time for questions at the end. So as always, do store up your questions. And when it comes time for questions, feel free to just use the raise hand button on Teams. We'll be monitoring that, or you can type your question in the chat, or you can PM me any questions you have. And then at the end, after the questions, we'll just hang around for a few more minutes if anyone wants to talk to George more informally or introduce themselves, again, internet permitting. Okay, so I will turn off my camera now, and George, it's over to you, and Brenda, over to you on the PowerPoint. All right.
Right. Thank you, Liz. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you really well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the invitation to take part in your seminar series. Yes, I'm hoping that next year I'll be able to join you. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, so my talk is on elections in Ghana, and I've titled it Presidential Campaign Stops in Ghana. This is work that we started way back in 2016. So I'm working on this project with my colleague, Dr. Jeffrey Pillar from the University of San Francisco. So what I'm going to present is just the preliminary data that we put together so that we can have some conversations around the issues that we want to look at. Right. So next, please. Right. Within the context of democratization, hello. Right. I see that, yes.
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Within the context of democratization, I'd like to start this discussion by looking at the Economic Intelligence Unit Democracy Index that over the years has always assessed the state of democracy in the world. The Democracy Index measures how democracy functions in democratic states under 5 categories: electoral process, pluralism, the functioning of government, political participation, political culture, and civil liberties. Next, please. Based on these categorization, the Economics Intelligence Unit Democracy Index categorize classified countries under 4 regime types. So we have a full democracy. That are very few countries that fall under full democracy. We'll have a flawed democracy, you have hybrid democracy, and you have authoritarian regime. Now, in the context of hybrid regimes and authoritarian regime, what I'm discussing is very relevant when you try to apply that to the African case, that a lot of the states that we have in Africa, democracy that they have come under these types. Of course, some scholars are questioning these regime types. Next, please. So the 2019 index reported that almost one half of the world population live in a democracy of some sort. However, only 6% reside in a full democracy. So the rest, the 94%, reside in one of these, either it's flawed, it's a hybrid regime, or authoritarian regime. Then the context of Africa is actually very exciting and surprising. It depends on how you look at it. Mauritius is classified as a full democracy. The US was demoted in 2016, and I'm sure the 2020 index that will come, the US is likely to still remain as a flawed democracy. Next, please. So according to the democracy index, the worldwide score for democracy also fell from 5.4 in 2018 to about 5.4 in 2018. And it's likely to do with the performance of states in sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, North Africa. Now, the question I asked, and for our reflection, is for us to look at the status of democracy in Africa, and for my particular interest in West Africa. What is the status of democracy in West Africa? Next. The state of democracy in West Africa in 2019. In 2019, states within West Africa sub-region, they've been categorized under these labels that I've talked on the initial slide. That so you have a lot of countries coming under the regime label. Then you have authoritarian regimes. Then in the context of those that are labeled as flawed, you have Cape Verde and Ghana, the same category with the US. So here again, the point that needs emphasizing is that there are still challenges, despite the fact that West Africans have practiced multi-party democracy for nearly 3 decades now. There are still challenges, and these are very important as we move forward. Next slide, please. Now, the year 2020 is maybe we'll label it as a year of elections in West Africa. Now, many states have held or are likely to be holding presidential and legislative elections this year. Togo, earlier in the year, Togo and Guinea held very controversial elections. Mali held its elections in April. Now, these were disputed and eventually led to the military taking over of the state. More recently, and closest to Ghana, La Côte d'Ivoire held its presidential elections. Of course, they were boycotted by the opposition. Now, this is very troubling. That looking at where Ivory Coast is coming from, the challenges that it has experienced in the past, conducting multi-party elections, and for us in Ghana, that's our Western neighbor, and yes, it's a challenge, and of course, they're trying to solve it there, and whilst we are getting ready to have ours. Next, please. Now, the scholarly debates about democratization in Africa tend to emphasize that African countries are democratizing through elections. It is likely true that the transition to civilian systems, to multi-party systems, were through elections. And this very important study edited by Stefan Lembeck, which myself and Jeffrey Taylor have used to look at the Ghanaian case, that in the context of Ghana, Ghana has since 1992 been holding regular elections, but that democracy does not just run on an even plane, but occasionally you have democratic ruptures, and that these ruptures allow the political system to realign. It allows political parties to realign. It allows for learning. It allows for the improvement of the system. And that, yes, democratic rights are very important. Then another very important study that is relevant for the context that I'm discussing is the questions that Jimmy Blake and Van Wally asked in 2018, that what motivates African citizens to vote, and what issues do candidates campaign on? Now, for the context that I'm discussing, looking at presidential campaign stocks in Ghana, it's very important for us to look at the issues that Ghanaian presidential candidates emphasize when they campaign. Then it's important for us to situate this discussion with what motivates Ghanaians to vote for the parties that they do vote for. But these are very important. Now, these broader debates frame the discussions that we're having around our work, which is still very preliminary. And yes, we will appreciate comments or pointing to literature that you feel is relevant to enrich this work. Next slide, please. Now, on top of this is the issue of the quality of electoral politics in West Africa. That the region has experienced significant democratic stagnation, regression, and backsliding, and the examples are not difficult to find. That what we have happening in Mali, in La Côte d'Ivoire, these are not improvements, but rather there is a regression and a stagnation in the case. But of course, the reason for these deteriorations will vary from state to state. But largely, the behavior of the incumbent regimes was a very crucial factor in the quality of these democracies that we are looking at. Next slide, please. Now, I come to Ghana, my case study. Ghana reintroduced party politics in 1992 after 3 failed attempts. Despite its late entry into democratization, it's often been singled out as one of the most mature democracies in Africa. Now, if you look at the Economic Intelligence Unit Index, Ghana is ranked at number 5 out of the countries that we have in sub-Saharan Africa, right? And it has some very unique features. That it has a very open political system and a number of very stable democratic institutions. Next slide, please. But scholars have, some commentators, social commentators and academics, sees Ghana as a model. It's a model for the rest of the continent. But Ghana is essentially an electoral democracy that it has not improved on its performance. Largely what it has and what is unique is just the conduct of elections. But the quality of it, the democratic evidence that citizens are yearning for, the reasons why they vote for, are still in dispute as to whether the system is delivering. But of course, its statute as a model democracy is based on its own history, which I would look at. The challenge with state building. Next slide, please. Now, what I just show you here are past leaders of Ghana in a very young country. It's had its share of history making, and that state building has been very challenging. There have been a lot of, at least currently, as we speak, we are in the Fourth Republic. But before that, there were 3 previous republics that did not survive. And of course, that Ghana's Fourth Republic was built on the foundation of authoritarianism, and that perhaps that history of authoritarian rule informs the decisions that citizens make when it comes to voting. That, of course, there's a generational shift, and many of today's generation never lived under a military regime. And perhaps it's this young generation that are giving support to the multi-party system that the country practices. Next slide, please. Still talking about the building blocks of the fourth republic, that the political class appears to have an agreement on the rules of the game, that there's an elite consensus among the two dominant traditions that have governed since the return to multi-party politics, and that for the political class, when they lose election, well, unlike Donald Trump, they would admit and congratulate the winner and they move on. So this elite consensus, in a way, has contributed to consolidate Ghana's gains in the next slide, please. Of course, above all, what is very important as a building block, in my opinion, is constitutionalism, which is that the constitution has come to regulate party politics, has come to regulate the system, and with presidential terms limits entrenched, and then at least no party has attempted amending the constitution. Each president have 2 terms to govern, and this led to gradual institutionalization of programmatic politics, where ideas now reign instead of populism. Eventual populism is still there, but it's largely about debating ideas. It's largely about debating which policy framework, which development blueprint is relevant moving forward. Next slide, please. Of course, on top of that, are very stable democratic institutions that at least there's a functioning legislature dominated by 2 political parties, largely for the Fourth Republic. And you have an independent judiciary that tries to insist on the rule of law and respect for due process. Then there's the protection for civil liberties and rights and freedom. Then you have a very active civil society organization and a free press, largely. Now, all of these institutions have contributed to making Ghana a model democracy, one that, if you compare the state to its peers, there are certain things that are working for Ghana that in other countries you wouldn't find. That next door to Ghana is Togo. Of course, press freedom, the freedom to associate freely. Next door is always a major issue, right? So these are some of the things. But the democracy that Ghana practices is just not perfect. All right. So in the next slide, please, I try to look at some of the defects of this model democracy that Ghana has built over the years. Next slide, please. But yes, in the first place, Ghana's democracy remains a work in progress. There are a lot of challenges with the system, and that the broadcast system itself, the way it's been designed, it does not contribute to making it very suitable for the political opposition, in the sense that the winner takes it all makes it almost impossible for the political opposition, unless you are in parliament where you can oppose government. The governing party captures power and takes power the way it's supposed to be. Winner takes it all. Then another defect that is challenging is the partisanship that is so endemic in the Ghanaian political system. Partisanship affects long-term development planning, because once one party dominates and they have control of parliament and the executive, everything is just revolving around the party that is in power. Okay, so this affects long-term development planning. Next slide, please. Of course, Then there's the question of extreme polarization, which is in the Ghanaian context that there seems to be a perpetual campaign mood constantly. Once the new president is sworn in, the government is in power, the opposition start campaigning from the very day that the president is sworn in. Okay. Liberal democracy, the way it's practiced, has contributed to growing inequalities in Ghana. Rural, urban, north, south. Okay. Yes, there's a growing middle class. I need to point that out. But on top of that, there's still largely a lot of people who are left out of these gains that the growing middle class is getting. Then the issue of low intensity electoral violence, that these are pockets of violence that occasionally still comes up. Ghana is going to the polls on the December. Ghana police have just released a report looking at what they call electoral hotspots. And overall, close to 6,000 electoral hotspots have been identified. Now, these are spots that violence is likely to degenerate into something else. And for a country that has practiced multi-party politics for nearly 3 decades, these are troubling issues. Next slide, please. Now, there's the issue of political representation, which is highly skewed in favor of males. It's a manly world. Women are underrepresented in political parties, in decision-making bodies across the country, even within party structures. Apart from the National Women's Organizers' role, women struggle to find a space in this environment. Okay, this is a problem, and that, of course, a very progressive state that wants to advance should be able to address some of this, but it's a defect. Next slide, please. Yes, above all, the most troubling is the institutionalization of what is popularly referred to as monocracy, not democracy, but monocracy, in the sense that party politics, public service has been monetized. It's only those with deep pockets, those with donors who can support and sponsor their campaign that will get into public office. And of course, because of that, campaign financing is highly unregulated. And this, of course, gives rise to political corruption. The daily reports of corruption, not only in one party, but across board. All of them, anytime they're in government, it's the same stories that Ghanaians will read. And one politician told me when I interviewed him several years ago that families grow food to eat. Indirectly, when they access public office, they must eat from public office. This is a defect that does not help the system. Now, I'll go to the third section, which will be the final section. Next slide, please, which is on election campaigns in Ghana. Next, yes. In Ghana, parliamentary campaigns are absorbed in presidential campaigns. And that, but above all, is the presidential election campaigns that attract popular support and interest than the others. And national election campaigns are organized from party headquarters, and they are almost always centered around the presidential nominee. Of course, party grassroots also organize and coordinate their own election campaigns. Next slide, please. Political parties are largely motivated to win elections at all costs. And in the Ghanaian context, there is no official period dedicated to campaigning. So, like I said earlier, it's always in a perpetual campaign mood, right? And political campaigns are only regulated by party constitutions. Of course, if the party that is governing, they will have a time period that they can campaigning if you are interested in parliamentary seat or something as presidential campaigns. But above all, incumbency imposes certain restrictions on the time that an election campaign can start. Next slide, please. Now, I'm coming to talk on the project that we are working on. Like I said from the beginning, that this is a work in progress. This is the first presentation that I'm making, and that I will just give you what the idea behind this project and what we're trying to look at. Essentially, we do not know where presidential candidates go during campaigns and what the major issues that they emphasize at each stop. So in the literature, there's very little on this subject, and we feel that it's an important thing that we need to look at. So there's no study that has documented where politicians go, why they go, the places they go, why they choose to focus on the areas they go, why they choose certain subjects when they visit those areas. This is very relevant for the literature. We feel that this is an area that needs further study, and that is why we are doing that. Next, please. So essentially, we are intending to compile a database of all information, evidence that maps out all the presidential campaign stops in Ghanaian elections. We started in 2016, like I said from the beginning. So this is the second presidential campaign stop that we're compiling data on. We are interested in where, when the presidential candidate began his or her election campaign, where the presidential candidates go, and what the major issues they emphasize at each stop. The study documents exactly what the politicians really do. We're only interested in what they really do. Right. Next slide, please. Now, the sources of data. Largely, we are using newspapers, collecting information from newspapers. We are using Daily Graphic and Ghanaian Times. Daily Graphic and Ghanaian Times are owned by the states, and well, these are newspapers of record. They report official information and documents where the president, what the leading politicians say. So these are state-owned. Then we look at the newspapers that are aligned to the two dominant parties. So, for instance, the Daily Guide and the Chronicle are pro MPP. Then the Herald and the Heritage are pro NDC. So we collect information from newspapers. Then we also monitor radio and local news, like those that have countrywide coverage. For instance, Joy FM has a lot of affiliate radio stations across the country. We listen to radio news and we collect data from there. Then we also pay close attention to their campaign schedules on social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter. Then on popular electronic sources like Ghana Web. These are largely the sources that we are using. We are not following presidential candidates and monitoring their campaigns. No, we are collecting information from a distance. But of course, we feel that this is the most safest, very reliable way to collect information on what we are trying to work on. Next slide, please. Now we try to the data. And we look at the date of the campaign event, the grievance referring to whether the candidate makes a claim to a particular grievance. Then we're also interested in the intermediary. This is whether any other people were mentioned as hosting the presidential candidate. Then we categorize our information also based on interest groups. And this refers to any mention of a specific interest group the candidate when they mount the campaign platform they refer to. Next slide, please. Then we look at infrastructure promise. That refers to the normal infrastructure that they promise. We look at a distributive claim. We look at a public, which refers to making a claim about what is in the best interest of the Ghanaian public and will also categorize based on evaluation, which refers to the candidate. Either they try to evaluate a past performance with their opponents. Next slide, please. Now, the choice of political parties. Currently, there are close to nearly 30 political parties that are registered and by the Electoral Commission of Ghana. But of course, all of these parties are not relevant if you are to apply Giovanni Sartori argument about relevance in the multi-party system. So in the Ghanaian case, we've settled on the two dominant parties. But since 1992, there have been 7 elections, and these elections have been won either by the National Democratic Congress or the New Patriotic Party. So these are the two political parties that the study is concerned with, and it's their presidential candidates that the study is trying to map up the presidential campaign stops. The other smaller parties are there, but of course, these are the dominant ones, and it's just about the attraction, and that is why we've settled on these two political parties. Yes. Now let me quickly report on some of the preliminary findings. Next slide, please. Next, please. Now, when it comes to where the presidential candidates go, the previous slide that we just moved from. Yes, these are the regions where they do the campaigning, the stops. So you find the 2016 versus the 2020 still going. Now, the region that was visited the most in 2016 was the Greater Accra region. That is where the national capital is. Then, in the same light, you look at 2020, that Greater Accra region is the most visited region by two presidential candidates. They stopped there in the suburbs, they went to marketplaces, they went to all other places within the region. Next is the central Eastern region in 2016. Eastern region was next visited most, and the Ashanti region. Then in 2020, we realized that the Volta region is coming next after the Greater Accra region, almost 22 visits to that region. Now, next, please. Please, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
The next slide, please. Actually, it's not showing on my. Okay, but if it's showing on yours, I'll just. What I try to show here is for those who don't have, provide a mental picture of Ghana and the regions that the presidential candidates go to. Yes, in 2016 there were 10 regions. In 2020 they created new regions, so we have 16 regions, and those are the regions where the presidential candidates make their stops. So the Greater Accra region, as I indicated, is the one that received the most campaign stops, followed by the Eastern region in 2016. In the 2020 region data, you find out that the Greater Accra received the most campaign stops, followed by the Volta region. Okay, yes, this also falls under the swing and core regions of Ghana. Next slide, please, which is looking at the types of campaign events, what they did. Okay, yes, the type of campaign event you see from the slide that in 2016, the dominant campaign event was rallies, that a lot of the presidential stops that the candidates did. It was about holding a rally. In 2020, you still find out that rallies, outdoor events are very important. So rallies is 24.1%, and other outdoor event 24.7%, which is still very relevant. Next slide, please. Yes, this is just to show an example of incumbency advantage for a campaign stop that I attended at Obuasi in the Ashanti region. This is just the program leaflet that was circulated. In front was the presidential candidate of the New Patriotic Party, that's the incumbent, His Excellency President Nana Akufo-Addo. Then at the back of the leaflet were two parliamentary candidates of the area. Okay. The next slide shows, please, next slide. The next slide shows the program of the campaign event. Yes, that if you can read, that is Obuasi Municipality and Obuasi Eats. Okay, this was an invitation for us from KUST to go and inaugurate the KUST Obuasi campus. But it was also a campaign event in the sense that there was a debate in honor of the president, and the president, in his capacity as the leader of the country, was also there as the candidate of the governing party. And it's all about symbolism, okay, and the rituals that go with campaign rallies or debates. Now there's the president going around inspecting road projects in the morning. The part one is the inspection of road projects. Then the part two is the arrival of unknown and invited guests, including those who came from KUST. Then the arrival of the president himself. Then there's the exchange of greetings. Then there's the opening prayer, then introduction of dignitaries. There's a chairman's remark. Then there's a welcome address by the Ashanti regional minister, who is a political appointee. Then there's a speech by the vice chancellor of KUST, because the program was to inaugurate KUST campus in Obuasi. Then there's a speech by the Minister of Education, who is a political appointee. Then there's a speech by the Minister for Roads and Highways, who is a political appointee. But earlier on in the day, he led the president to inspect roads. Then finally, is this address by His Excellency the President. Then the president now introduces the parliamentary candidates. Then the president moves to commission the KUST Obuasi campus. Now, this is typical of the campaign stops for an incumbent. It's about financial projects to start. It's about commissioning projects. It's about outdooring new inventions and the rest. But beneath all of these public symbolism is the electoral currency, which is trying to convince citizens to vote for the party. Next slide, please. Of course. So what you see here is the commissioning of the project, which was a renovated building to be used as a campus for my university. Then in the plaque commissioning, that the president's name is first. Yes, to my right, the plaque there shows the president, his name is there, followed by His Royal Majesty 2432, who is the Chancellor of my university, and the university chancellor's name is there, and the Minister for Education, all the way to the Vice Chancellor of the university. Here again, it's all about symbolism, but of course, it's to capitalize on the opportunity that this is a government that is providing development, and that if you renew the mandate, you would get many more of such development. Next slide, please. Now, the next slide talks about the campaign intermediaries, and that if you look at the raw data that we have here, 2016 and 2020. But 2020, a lot of the intermediaries were traditional authorities. All right, a lot of them traditional authorities, 70. Then you look at the 2016, again, traditional authorities were very significant, and we lump the others as others. But it's very important in the sense that ultimately, when the president or a presidential candidate goes into the region, the first place of call is always the traditional authorities palace, and they're invited to the program. So you find them as acting very, very crucially, even though I've argued elsewhere that chiefs don't have the power to convince people to vote for parties, but it's just the symbolism and the public display of support or political endorsement that when they are allowed to speak at the political rally, usually tend to praise the government for their programs and all that. But yes, they are very influential intermediary when it comes to the presidential campaign stuff that this project is all about. Can you go to the second slide forward, not the next one, after the other one, which looks at the nature of green. The next one, please. Yes. So when it comes to the questions of grievances that are addressed or promises made, a lot of it largely is on social, education, health. All right. If you look at 2016, it was almost the same. Then next is economic. In the context of 2016, economic was very high, which is job creation, job creation. In the context of 2020, it's about education. And it's not surprising in the sense that it's very high on the agenda here, because in the last election, it was one of the major issues that was emphasized. And a lot of commentators, writers have actually used the issue of the introduction of free education as one of the major things that won the election for the incumbent. So education is also coming up strongly here in the 2020 as a grievance, and health is also the social very important. Next slide, please. Now, yes, finally, we look at the distributive claims, okay, that these were largely directed at the general public and more sectional interests. You see, that is all about the public. If you look at the 2016, distributive claims were directed towards the general public, 58%. You come to 2020, it's about 83.2%. This is very significant, which is also reinforcing the point that programmatic politics has taken root in the Ghanaian context. That is not about promising private goods, but it's about providing collective goods for the public. And that is why the presidential candidates emphasize that mostly. Yes, and finally to my concluding remarks, please, the final slide. Yes, that research on electoral mobilization in Africa focuses on core versus swing voters, and it also makes linkages with clientelistic networks and the role of ethnic voting. But what we're trying to emphasize here is that we should go beyond this and look at how social and institutional conditions, who these generally are not well stated, but they're also very important. So essentially, what we're attempting to do here is to try and conceptualize a new way to understand political mobilization, okay? And that we are looking at political mobilization and linking it to looking at political campaigns as a season. These are one-time events. They come almost every 4 years. Now, when they come, that season is unique in the sense that we find out what we just presented here, that in the context of Ghana, two political parties with their presidential candidates going across the length and breadth of the country, promising public goods, cutting short for projects to start, commissioning new projects, that this needs to be studied and studied in depth. Right. So this is what I have to present. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, George. That was really, really fascinating. And I think despite all of your disclaimers about it being a relatively new project, it sounds like you've actually already done quite a lot of data collection and data analysis. So that was really interesting to see. I would encourage everyone to ask questions, but just while people gather their thoughts, I thought I would take advantage of chairing and maybe ask the first one, which is I wanted to ask. Well, actually, I'm going to abuse my privileges and ask two questions, George, if that's all right.